The restaurant was quieter than usual that evening. The soft sound of piano music drifted through the air, blending with the low murmur of people talking and glasses touching. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the tall windows, and the faint sound of traffic hummed in the distance. Inside, everything felt warm, golden, and peaceful. At a corner table near the window sat a young woman. She wasn't dressed like the others. No sparkling jewelry, no designer dress, no bold lipstick. Just a plain white blouse, soft curls tied neatly, and a calm face that seemed lost in thought. Her name was Amara. Amara had been sitting there for 20 minutes before her food even arrived. She wasn't in a rush. In fact, she came here tonight to slow down, to think, to breathe. The past few months had been heavy on her. Job rejections, rent worries, the feeling of being invisible no matter how hard she tried. Eating out alone wasn't something she did often, but tonight she needed silence that her tiny apartment couldn't give. She looked around the restaurant, watching people laugh and raise their glasses. Everyone seemed to belong to someone, friends, couples, colleagues. And there she was, eating alone, quietly cutting her food and pretending not to notice when waiters glanced at her with polite curiosity. It wasn't sadness she felt, it was something else, something harder to explain. She was used to being the quiet one, the observer, the person people forgot was there. Sometimes she wondered if being invisible was a curse or a blessing. The waiter came over to check on her. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked softly. She smiled politely. "Yes, thank you. Everything's perfect." Her voice was gentle, kind, but firm enough to make it clear she didn't need company. The waiter nodded and left. A few tables away sat Liam, a man who didn't usually dine in public without a crowd of cameras or business partners. He was known in the city for his money, his investments, and his carefully measured smile that seemed to hide more than it revealed. People whispered his name in meetings, in magazines, and at charity galas. But tonight Liam was just another man trying to escape the noise of his own world. He noticed Amara the moment she walked in. Not because she was trying to be noticed, quite the opposite. Her quietness stood out in a room full of people who wanted attention. There was something peaceful about the way she carried herself, like she didn't owe anyone an explanation for being there. Liam watched her for a few minutes, then forced himself to look away. He didn't want to be rude, but as the evening went on, his eyes kept returning to her. The way she stirred her drink, the way she looked out the window as if remembering something she lost, the way she smiled faintly at her plate like she was trying to convince herself that this moment was enough. He didn't understand why she caught his attention, but she did. Amara didn't know that the man at the corner was watching her. She didn't know who he was, or that his name carried weight in every boardroom in the city. To her, he was just another diner. Her thoughts were far away, back to her small apartment, her unfinished art projects. The message from her mother earlier that day reminding her to keep believing things will change. She wanted to believe that, but belief didn't pay bills. As she slowly ate, she thought about the interview she had last week. She had gone in full of hope, wearing her best outfit, answering every question perfectly, and yet she never got a call back. She wondered if they saw her and decided she didn't fit their picture. Too quiet, too different, too much of something they couldn't name. Still, she didn't complain. She never did. Complaining didn't fix things. When she finished eating, she asked for the bill. The waiter brought it, and she smiled politely as she opened her small wallet. It wasn't much, but she had planned for this dinner. She allowed herself this one night out, her small act of self-care. While she was signing the receipt, Liam stood up. His dinner companions had already left earlier, and he had been sitting alone for the past half hour, pretending to check his phone. He hesitated for a moment, then walked toward her table. "Excuse me," he said softly. Amara looked up, surprised. The man standing before her was tall, dressed in a simple black suit, nothing flashy but clearly expensive. His eyes were calm. "Curious, yes?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice low and even. "I just wanted to say you seem peaceful. It's rare to see someone sit alone in a place like this and look so comfortable." She blinked, unsure what to say. It wasn't the kind of comment she was used to. Most people didn't even notice her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just like quiet places." He nodded, almost smiling. "I understand that." He hesitated again, like he wanted to say more but didn't want to seem intrusive. After a moment, he simply said, "Have a good evening," and started to walk away. Amara watched him leave, puzzled but not uncomfortable. There was something about his tone. It wasn't flirtatious or rehearsed. It sounded genuine, like he had really meant what he said. She gathered her things, stood up, and headed for the door. Outside, the evening air felt cool against her skin. The streets glowed with the reflections of car lights and passing buses. She took a deep breath, preparing for the long walk home. But as she stepped down the last stair from the restaurant, she heard the same voice again. "Wait," he said. She turned. It was him again, the man from the restaurant. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough that his voice didn't have to rise. There was something in his expression, serious but not intimidating. "Can I ask you something unusual?" he said. Amara frowned slightly. "Depends how unusual." He looked almost embarrassed, which surprised her. "Would you be my girlfriend?" She blinked. "What?" He raised a hand, quickly adding, "Not for real. I mean, for a while." Amara stared at him, completely confused. Was this some kind of joke? She looked around, half expecting to see someone recording from behind a car. "I don't understand," she said slowly. He sighed, as if realizing how strange it sounded. "I know how it sounds, but I'm serious. I need someone real to be by my side for a while. I can explain, but maybe not here." Amara shook her head slightly, half in disbelief. "You don't even know me." "That's the point," he said quietly. "You don't know me either." The city lights flickered against his face, and for the first time she noticed a softness in his eyes, a kind of weariness that people usually hide behind smiles. She crossed her arms. "If this is some kind of rich man game, I'm not interested." He shook his head. "It's not a game." She studied him for a moment, trying to decide if he was being honest. There was something strange about the situation, yet she couldn't sense any malice in him. Only exhaustion. "I think you've got the wrong person," she said finally. "I'm not anyone special." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I asked you." For a long moment they just stood there, the noise of the street filling the space between them. Amara didn't know whether to laugh or walk away. She should have walked away, but something about his tone, gentle, almost pleading, made her pause. "I can explain everything," he said. "Just give me 10 minutes, she hesitated. 10 minutes? He nodded. She thought about it. Maybe he was crazy, or maybe he was just another lonely person looking for something he couldn't name. Either way, 10 minutes wouldn't hurt. "All right," she said softly. 10 minutes, he smiled. Not the polished smile of a man used to getting his way, but a relieved one, like he hadn't expected her to agree. They walked a short distance down the block to a small coffee shop that was still open. Inside, the lighting was dim, the tables mostly empty. They sat in a quiet corner. He looked at her for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I'm not sure how to say this without sounding strange, but I'm in a complicated situation. My family runs a company, big, old, and traditional. They think I'm too distant. They want me to settle down, and there's a deal I'm negotiating that depends on my personal image. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I need someone by my side for a while to make it look like I've changed." Amara raised an eyebrow. "So you want to hire a fake girlfriend?" He nodded slightly. "Something like that." She stared at him, half amused, half bewildered. "You could hire anyone. Why me?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because you don't seem like you'd pretend. You looked real tonight. I've been surrounded by people who act every minute of the day. But you sat there, eating alone like you didn't need anyone's approval. That's rare." Amara didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being noticed for just existing quietly. "I don't think you understand what you're asking," she said softly. "I do," he said, "and I'll make sure you're comfortable. You can say no any time." She looked down at her coffee, thinking, this was crazy. Who asks a stranger to pretend to be their girlfriend? But there was something about him that didn't feel fake. Maybe it was his tone or the tiredness in his eyes. She sighed. "I don't even know your name." "Liam," he said simply. "Liam Carter." Her eyes widened slightly. She had heard the name before. She didn't follow celebrity news, but even she knew who he was. "You're that Liam Carter?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Unfortunately, yes." Amara leaned back. "Then you definitely don't need someone like me." "You could pick anyone." "I could," he said. "But I don't want anyone. I want someone who doesn't care who I am." She looked at him for a long time. Then she shook her head slowly, laughing under her breath. You're serious. Completely. The silence between them stretched, comfortable in its strangeness. She didn't know whether to feel flattered or worried. I'll think about it, she finally said, standing up. He nodded. That's all I ask. As she walked to the door, she turned slightly. I still think you're a little crazy, he smiled. Probably. She left the coffee shop and stepped back into the cool night air. The city hummed around her. Cars, laughter, the distant sound of a street performer's guitar. She walked home, her thoughts spinning. She couldn't decide if the night had been strange or magical. Maybe both. When she reached her apartment, she dropped her bag on the chair and sat by the window, staring out at the lights below. Her heart was still racing, not from fear, but from curiosity. Who was this man really? Why her? Why tonight? She didn't know it yet, but this small, unexpected moment, the quiet dinner, the strange offer, the man's whisper, was about to change everything she thought she knew about herself and about the world she lived in. For now, though she sat there quietly, listening to the city breathe, unaware that her life was no longer ordinary. It had just shifted quietly, like the soft click of a door opening to something she could never have imagined. Amara couldn't stop thinking about that strange night. She woke up the next morning feeling like it had all been a dream. The man from the restaurant, Liam, his calm voice, his unusual offer, it all felt too unreal. Who meets a stranger in a fancy restaurant and asks them to pretend to be their girlfriend? She made coffee and sat by her small window, watching the city come alive below. The sun was soft and pale, sliding between buildings. For a few minutes, she let herself enjoy the silence before reality returned. Rent was due next week. The job interview she had been waiting for hadn't called back. And now this strange billionaire had appeared in her life out of nowhere. It was ridiculous. She told herself she wouldn't think about it again. But she did. All day. By evening, she finally gave in to curiosity. She searched his name online, just once, she promised herself. The articles came up instantly. Liam Carter, business tycoon, tech investor, philanthropist. His photo appeared beside headlines about partnerships, charity projects, and events with political leaders. Every picture showed him surrounded by people, smiling, confident, unreachable. She closed the laptop. He didn't belong to her world. 2 days passed. Then a text appeared on her phone. It's Liam, I hope I'm not bothering you. Can we talk for a few minutes? Coffee again. I treat. She stared at the message for a long time. She didn't remember giving him her number. Then she realized when she paid the bill that night, she'd written her phone number on the receipt as part of the restaurant's customer survey. He must have seen it by chance. She typed, deleted, and retyped a dozen replies before finally sending a simple one. 5 minutes. That's all? An hour later, she was sitting in the same coffee shop. It was quieter this time. The rain outside tapped gently on the windows, and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. Liam arrived exactly on time, wearing a gray sweater instead of a suit. He looked less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man who hadn't slept much. Thank you for coming, he said as he sat down. Amara folded her arms. You said you'd explain. He nodded. I will. But first, I just want to say, I understand how strange this must be. I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't desperate for something real. She studied him carefully. His tone was calm but tired, and there was no arrogance in it. Why me? She asked again quietly. Because you don't want anything from me, he said. Everyone around me does. You looked peaceful that night. You didn't care who was watching. You were just being yourself. I need that. For a while, she leaned back, still not convinced. What exactly are you asking for? He took a breath. I need someone to accompany me to certain events. My family's pressuring me to appear more stable, and the people I work with expect me to have someone by my side. But I don't want to pretend with anyone who's chasing money or fame. I just need a partner for a few months, someone who can act natural, keep things simple. So you want to hire me? Not exactly. I'll compensate you, of course, but it's not a performance. I'd like you to be yourself. No fake stories, no pretending to be in love, just company. Someone I can trust to tell me the truth, not what I want to hear. Amara laughed softly, shaking her head. You know how crazy that sounds, right? I do, he said, smiling a little. But I meant every word. They sat in silence for a moment. The rain grew heavier. drumming against the glass. Amara sipped her coffee slowly, thinking. You're offering to pay someone to spend time with you. Doesn't that sound lonely? He looked down at his hands. It is. The honesty in his voice made her pause. She wasn't expecting that. He wasn't hiding behind charm or power. He just sounded human. She looked at him again, seeing the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Maybe being rich didn't mean being free. I still don't think I'm the right person, she said softly. He nodded. Maybe not. But I'd like you to think about it. You don't have to decide now, she stood up. I'll think about it. As she left the coffee shop, she caught her reflection in the glass, her plain coat, her tired eyes, her steady steps. She wasn't sure what she was walking away from, something absurd or something extraordinary. The next week moved slowly. Amara went back to her routine, sending out job applications, helping her neighbor's daughter with homework, running errands for her mother. But every night before she slept, she thought of that conversation. His eyes, his tone, the quiet sadness beneath his words. 3 days later, another text arrived. I'll be at the art gallery on 5th Street tonight. No expectations. Just come by if you'd like. Amara stared at it for a while. She didn't reply. But later that evening, as she was walking home from the grocery store, she found herself standing outside that very gallery. Inside, people were mingling in elegant clothes, glasses of wine in hand, murmuring about paintings that cost more than her rent for a year. She told herself she'd just take a quick look and leave. Liam was there, talking to an older man in a suit. When he saw her, his eyes softened. He excused himself and walked toward her. You came, he said, smiling. I was nearby, she replied, though both of them knew that wasn't true. He looked genuinely pleased. I'm glad. She tried to act casual, but the attention around him was impossible to ignore. People watched him everywhere he went. She noticed how others greeted him, some too eagerly, some too carefully. But he didn't seem to notice them. His focus was only on her. Would you like to see something? He asked. She nodded, and he led her to a quiet corner where a single painting hung. It showed a girl sitting alone on a park bench surrounded by empty space. The brushstrokes were soft, the colors muted. It's beautiful, she said. He nodded. It reminds me of that night in the restaurant. She smiled faintly. You really don't give up, do you? Not when something feels right, he said quietly. For a moment they stood there, neither speaking. The noise of the room faded around them. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was just peaceful. Later, as they left the gallery, he walked beside her in the cool night air. You don't have to decide now, he said again. But I'd like you to come with me to one event this weekend. Just as a friend. No pressure, Amara hesitated. What kind of event? A charity dinner. Very formal, lots of cameras. I just need someone to talk to who won't be pretending. She sighed. You really think that's a good idea? I do, he said. You'll blend right in, she laughed lightly. I don't think I blend in anywhere. Then maybe that's exactly what's missing, he said. Against her better judgment, she agreed. When Saturday came, she spent hours trying to figure out what to wear. She finally settled on a simple black dress she had owned for years. It wasn't fancy, but it fit well and made her feel comfortable. A sleek car arrived at her building right on time. The driver greeted her politely and opened the door. Inside, Liam sat waiting, dressed in a black suit. When he saw her, his expression softened. You look perfect, he said. She smiled nervously. I feel like I'm walking into a movie I didn't audition for. Don't worry, he said. Just be yourself. That's all you need to do. The dinner was held in a grand hall filled with chandeliers and laughter. The air smelled of perfume and expensive wine. Amara felt out of place at first, but Liam stayed close, introducing her simply as a friend. People looked at her curiously, some with polite smiles, others with subtle judgment. But Amara carried herself with quiet grace. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply observed, listened, and answered politely when spoken to. At one point, a woman approached Liam. "You've finally brought someone, Liam," she said with a teasing tone. "We were starting to think you'd sworn off companionship." Liam smiled. "You know me, I like surprises." The woman turned to Amara, her eyes scanning her from head to toe. "And what do you do, dear?" "I'm between jobs right now," Amara said honestly. "Trying to figure things out." The woman blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "How refreshing," she said, forcing a smile before walking away. Amara looked at Liam, who seemed amused. Was that supposed to be a compliment? She whispered. Probably not, he whispered back. But it was honest. As the night went on, she began to relax. They talked about everything. Books, travel, small things that didn't feel heavy. When she laughed, it was genuine, and he seemed lighter too. For a few hours, they both forgot the world outside. When the evening ended, Liam walked her to the car. The night air was cool and the city sparkled with light. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much easier that was with you there." She smiled softly. "You're welcome. But I still don't understand what you get from this." He looked at her, thoughtful. "Peace," he said simply. For the first time in a long time. She didn't know what to say to that. On the drive home, she watched the city pass by through the window. She didn't know where this strange arrangement was heading or if she should even continue. But there was something about him, a sincerity that made her want to see where it led. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in her mind. The way he looked at her not as a stranger or a project, but as if he saw something in her that she had stopped seeing in herself. For the first time in months, she smiled before falling asleep. In the days that followed, Liam called again, not about events this time, but just to talk. They spoke about small things, life, memories, fears. He asked her about her art, and she admitted she used to paint but had stopped because life got too busy. He told her he used to write music before business took over. They found comfort in their differences, and slowly, something began to shift between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something honest, something real. Amara still didn't fully understand why he had chosen her, but each time they talked, she felt less like a stranger in his world. And though she reminded herself that it was temporary, a small part of her began to hope it might not be. What started as a strange deal between two lonely people was quietly becoming something neither of them could name. And while neither dared to admit it yet, both knew deep down that the line between pretend and real was beginning to blur. The weeks that followed the charity, dinner moved in slow motion for Amara. Nothing about her. Everyday life had changed. On the surface, she still woke up in her tiny apartment, made coffee, sent out job applications, and took long evening walks to clear her thoughts. But something inside her had shifted. There was a new voice in her days now, a quiet one that belonged to Liam. He didn't overwhelm her with constant messages or calls. Instead, he reached out in small, thoughtful ways. Sometimes it was a text saying, "How's your morning?" Or, "Did you ever finish that painting you mentioned?" Once he sent a photo of a sunset over the city skyline with no words at all. Somehow that picture spoke more than a paragraph ever could. Amara tried not to overthink it. She told herself this was just part of his arrangement. He wanted someone to help him appear grounded, someone real. She wasn't supposed to feel anything about it. Yet each time she saw his name on her phone screen, she couldn't help but smile. One afternoon he called and asked, "Would you like to come by the office?" "No events, no cameras. I just want to show you something." Amara hesitated. "Your office. Isn't that a bit too public?" He laughed softly. "Don't worry, I'll make sure it's private. I just think you should see the world I live in before deciding if you still want to be part of this." Curiosity got the better of her. 2 hours later, she found herself standing in front of a tall glass building that seemed to touch the clouds. The security guards greeted her politely, as if they had been expecting her. A woman at the front desk led her to the top floor, where Liam's office overlooked the entire city. He was waiting by the window, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking less like a billionaire and more like a man who had spent too many nights thinking instead of sleeping. "Welcome," he said with a smile. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." "I almost did," she admitted, glancing around the room. It was modern, minimal, and spotless, except for one wall covered with photographs and sketches. "Is this your work?" she asked, walking closer. He nodded. "A little project I started years ago. Every time I travel, I take a picture of something that reminds me of peace. It helps me remember that there's more to life than meetings." She looked at the wall. Images of quiet lakes, children laughing, an old woman selling flowers, a street musician smiling at the rain. Each photo seemed to hold a piece of someone's real life, captured in an unguarded moment. "They're beautiful," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You know, I haven't shown this wall to anyone before." Amara turned to look at him. "Why me?" Because you'd understand, he said simply. There was something in his tone that made her chest tighten. He wasn't just talking about the pictures. They spent the next hour talking. About art, about loneliness, about how strange it was to feel connected to someone whose life was so different. She told him about her struggles finding a stable job, and he listened without judgment, as if her words mattered more than all the business reports stacked on his desk. When she finally stood to leave, he said quietly, "There's an event next weekend. A small one, private. I'd like you to come. No press, just a few close people." Amara smiled. "You really can't go anywhere alone, can you?" He chuckled. "Not without people making assumptions." She nodded. "All right, I'll go. But this doesn't mean I'm agreeing to be your pretend girlfriend yet." He smiled knowingly. Of course not. But both of them knew the line between pretend and real was slowly fading. The night of the event arrived sooner than she expected. It was held at a countryside estate owned by one of Liam's business partners. The drive there was long and quiet. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh rain. When they arrived, Amara was surprised at how relaxed it felt. No cameras, no flashing lights, just people talking near a fireplace and soft music playing in the background. Liam introduced her to a few close friends, none of whom treated her with the judgment she'd expected. In fact, one older woman leaned in and said warmly, "It's nice to finally see Liam with someone who makes him smile." "It's been a while." Amara didn't know what to say. She smiled politely, unsure how to respond. Later, as the night grew quieter, she found herself sitting alone outside on the terrace, looking up at the stars. The air was cool and the sky seemed endless. Liam joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and sat beside her. "I hope tonight wasn't too much," he said. "It was surprisingly normal," she said with a small laugh. "I thought rich people only threw loud parties." He smiled. "Sometimes we like peace too." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the soft rustle of trees. "Can I ask you something?" Amara said suddenly. "Anything. Why me?" "Really, you could have anyone. Why a random woman you met in a restaurant?" He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Because when I saw you that night, you weren't trying to be seen. Everyone in that room was performing. You were just being yourself. And I realized I missed being around people like that." She looked at him quietly. There was honesty in his voice that left no room for doubt. "Sometimes," he continued, "you don't realize how much noise you live in until you meet someone who's silent enough to hear your thoughts." Amara smiled faintly. "That's poetic," he laughed softly. "I didn't mean it to be." Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was real. The next few weeks felt like a blur. Liam started inviting her to more things. Museum visits, quiet lunches, late-night walks through the city when no one was watching. They laughed more, talked more, and each time the space between them felt smaller. But the world around them wasn't blind. People began to notice. A few photos of them together appeared online, blurry but unmistakable. The headlines were filled with guesses about who she was. Some were kind, most were not. Amara tried to ignore it, but one evening she saw an article that made her stomach twist. "Who is Liam Carter's mystery woman?" The comments were cruel. People questioning her background, her appearance, her worth. She turned off her phone and sat quietly in her room for hours. When Liam called later, she didn't answer. She needed time to breathe. The next day, he showed up at her door. "No bodyguards, no car, just him?" "I saw the articles," he said softly. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," she said, looking away. "I knew something like this would happen. People will always talk." "I can make it stop," he said firmly. "I can call my team," and she shook her head. "You can't control what people say, but you can control what you want from this. And I need to know, what is this really? Because I can't be a headline for someone else's story." He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You're not. You're part of mine." She didn't expect that answer. "I didn't plan for any of this," he said. "I thought it would be simple. A few months, appearances, and then we'd move on. But you made me see things differently. You made me remember what real feels like." Her eyes softened. "You're saying that now. But when the noise gets louder, will you still mean it?" He took a step closer. "I've never meant anything more." There was a long pause. Neither of them moved. Then quietly she said, "I'm scared." "So am I," he admitted. That simple honesty made something inside her melt. For once, she didn't feel like the invisible girl sitting alone at a restaurant. She felt seen. He reached for her hand slowly, carefully. We don't have to have all the answers right now. Let's just take it one day at a time. She hesitated before finally nodding. One day at a time. From then on, their connection grew naturally, quietly. They spent more time together away from public eyes. Liam began showing her parts of his life he never shared with anyone. His childhood home, his favorite old bookstore, even the tiny diner where he used to eat with his mother before she passed away. Amara, in turn, let him into her world. She introduced him to her neighbors, showed him the park where she used to draw as a teenager, and cooked for him in her small kitchen. He sat at her little table eating her home-cooked food like it was the finest meal in the world. "This is better than anything money can buy," he said once, smiling. She rolled her eyes, laughing. "You just say that because you didn't have to cook it." But deep down, she knew he meant it. Every moment with him felt simple and real. And yet, a part of her remained cautious. She knew this story had begun as an arrangement, a temporary deal. The question that haunted her now was whether it still was. One evening, as they walked through the park, she asked softly, "When does the for a while part end?" He stopped walking and looked at her. "Do you want it to end?" She didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a group of children playing nearby. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I know I don't want to keep pretending." "Then we won't," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Something about his tone made her believe him. As they stood there under the fading light, Amara realized that the line between their agreement and their feelings had vanished completely. What had started as a quiet dinner with a stranger had turned into something deeper than she could have imagined. And though neither said the words out loud, both knew that this was no longer an act. This was real. For the first time in a long while, Amara didn't feel like the quiet girl on the outside looking in. She was part of something fragile, unexpected, but true. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But as Liam reached for her hand, warm and steady, she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes life changes not with noise or drama, but with a whisper, and hers had begun the night a stranger asked her to be his girlfriend for a while. Amara woke up that morning with sunlight slipping through the thin curtains of her small apartment. It was one of those quiet mornings when everything felt suspended between calm and uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, she didn't rush to send job applications or scroll through her phone. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed and just breathed. The past few months with Liam had been a whirlwind, unexpected, beautiful, confusing, and sometimes overwhelming. Their relationship had changed from something pretend into something real, though neither of them had used that word out loud. They didn't need to. It was there in the way he looked at her when she laughed, and in how she found comfort in his silence. But the world outside their little bubble was not as kind. The media had not stopped following their story. Every few days a new photo or rumor surfaced. Some were harmless, stories about where they'd been seen or what she was wearing. Others cut deeper, questioning her background, her intentions, even her worth. Liam had tried to protect her from it, but Amara could tell it weighed on him. Every time he saw something negative online, his jaw would tighten, and he'd change the subject. One afternoon, as they sat in his car overlooking the city, she said quietly, "You don't have to keep hiding it from me." "I know people are talking," he sighed, resting his hands on the steering wheel. "I just don't want you to read that nonsense. None of it matters." "It matters to me," she said softly. "Not because it's true, but because it's cruel. And I can't help thinking that maybe I'm making things harder for you." He turned to look at her. "You're not. You make things better. Don't ever think you're a problem." She smiled faintly, though his words didn't erase the ache inside her. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. She missed her quiet anonymity, the peace of being just another face in the crowd. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked out to her small balcony and looked up at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were gossiping about her, spinning stories she'd never be able to correct. She wondered if this was the price of being part of Liam's world. A few days later, he surprised her with a weekend trip to a seaside town far from the city. "No phones, no press," he said as they packed the car. "Just us." The drive was long and peaceful. They rolled down the windows, letting the cool air in, and sang along quietly to old songs playing on the radio. Amara could feel the weight she'd been carrying begin to lift. When they arrived, the town felt like something out of another time, small cottages, narrow streets, and the smell of salt in the air. They stayed in a cozy inn near the shore with a balcony overlooking the ocean. That first evening, they walked along the beach barefoot, their shoes in hand. The waves touched their feet, retreating gently. "It's strange," Amara said, watching the horizon. "Out here it feels like none of that other stuff exists." "That's the point," Liam said. "Sometimes you need to step away from the noise to remember who you are." She smiled. "You sound like you've done this before." He laughed softly. "I have. When things get too heavy, I come here. It's the one place I can just be myself." They sat on the sand until the sun disappeared, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt free. Later, as they ate dinner on the balcony, she asked, "Do you ever wish you weren't who you are?" Liam thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remind myself that everything I've built came from choices I made. I just didn't realize how lonely success can be." She looked at him, the candlelight flickering between them. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I don't feel so lonely." The days passed quietly. They visited small cafes, walked through local markets, and talked about ordinary things, childhood memories, favorite movies, and future dreams. Amara found herself laughing more than she had in years, but the peace didn't last forever. On their last morning there, Liam received a call. His expression changed as he listened, his eyes growing serious. When he hung up, she could tell something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "There's a story coming out today. One of my business rivals leaked something about us. They're questioning your background, saying you're with me for money." Amara's chest tightened. "Of course they are. I'll handle it," he said firmly. "Don't worry," she nodded, though the words stung. They had been careful, honest with each other. But the world outside only saw what it wanted to see. When they returned to the city, the storm had already started. Social media was full of comments, half-truths, and speculation. Some people defended her, but many didn't. Amara decided to stay home for a while. She didn't want to be seen. Even going to the grocery store felt exhausting. Every glance felt like a question she couldn't answer. Liam visited her often, bringing food, flowers, or just quiet company. But she could see how much it troubled him too. His work began to suffer. He canceled meetings, ignored calls, and his assistant looked worried every time Amara saw her. One evening, after he'd taken another call outside, Amara stood by the window, watching him. His voice was low, but she could tell the conversation was tense. When he came back in, she asked, "Are you losing something because of me?" He froze. "What?" She turned to him, her eyes steady. "Your reputation, your deals, your peace of mind. Are you losing those because of me?" He shook his head. "Don't say that. You're not the reason people are cruel. But I'm part of it," she said, "and I don't want to be the reason your life becomes harder." He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Listen to me. I've spent years surrounded by people who only cared about what I could give them. You're the first person who's here without wanting anything. That's not a burden, Amara, that's a gift." Her eyes softened. "You really believe that?" "I do." She wanted to believe it too. But deep inside, she couldn't silence the doubt. Over the next few weeks, they tried to move forward. Liam invited her to a charity gala, smaller than the one where they first met, but still filled with familiar faces. She didn't want to go, but he insisted gently. "We can't hide forever," he said. When they arrived, the room buzzed with whispers. Amara held her head high even though her heart raced. People smiled politely, but she could feel the unspoken questions in their eyes. After that, Liam turned to her with a small smile. "Now they know." She couldn't help but laugh softly. "You really like making bold moves, don't you?" He grinned. Sometimes the only way to silence rumors is to tell the truth. The rest of the night passed more easily. Some people even approached her kindly, congratulating them. She felt lighter, though she knew the world wouldn't change overnight. Later that night, when they were alone in the car, Amara said quietly, "That was brave." "It was honest," he replied. "I'm tired of pretending that you're temporary." "You're not." Her heart swelled. For the first time, she let herself believe that this was real. Not just something borrowed from his world, but something they had built together. Still, life didn't magically become easier. The media slowly calmed down, but not completely. Liam's business faced a few setbacks, and Amara continued to navigate her new reality. One evening, they went to a small art exhibition. As they walked through the gallery, Amara stopped in front of a painting of a lone woman sitting by a window, light streaming in. "She looks peaceful," Liam said beside her. "She looks lonely," Amara replied. He glanced at her. "Maybe she's both." Amara smiled faintly. "Maybe." She didn't realize then how true that would become. In the following months, Liam had to travel more often for work. Their schedules didn't always align. They talked on the phone, but it wasn't the same. The distance brought doubts, quiet ones that crept in during late nights. One day, she received an invitation to a gallery showcase for young artists. It was a small local event, but it meant a lot to her. She wanted to tell Liam, but his assistant informed her he was overseas for a major deal. So she went alone, standing in the small room, surrounded by her own artwork, paintings. Inspired by moments she'd shared with him, Amara felt proud. People stopped to compliment her work, and for the first time she felt seen for something she had created herself. When she got home, she sent Liam a message. "The show went well. I sold 2 paintings," he replied hours later. "That's amazing. I'm proud of you." But somehow the distance between the words felt heavier than usual. Weeks later, when he returned, he seemed different, tired, distracted, weighed down by something she couldn't name. They still cared deeply for each other, but the world kept pulling them in opposite directions. One night, as they sat in silence on her couch, Amara finally said, "Liam, do you ever wish things were simpler?" He looked at her, then nodded slowly. "Every day," she sighed. "I think I do too." He reached for her hand. "No matter what happens, you've changed me. You made me see what real means again." She smiled sadly. "You did the same for me." They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Some connections are so deep that words only get in the way. As Liam left that night, the city lights reflected in his eyes. He turned back once and said quietly, "No matter where I am, you're part of my story." And just like that, he was gone into the night, leaving behind the soft echo of everything they had built together, something fragile, beautiful, and unforgettable. Amara stood by the window long after he left, her heart full and aching at the same time. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing. Whatever came next, she had lived something real. Months had passed since that night when Liam walked away into the city lights. Amara's life had slowly returned to something that felt familiar, quiet, simple, steady. She was painting again, teaching art lessons at a small community center, and spending her evenings at home with music playing softly in the background. Sometimes, she would catch herself glancing at her phone, expecting a message that didn't come. Other times, she would smile at the memory of their time together, how something so unexpected had changed both their lives. She hadn't seen him since that night. Not in person, not even in passing. The headlines about him had faded too. A few stories popped up about his business deals or charity work, but his personal life had gone silent. It was as if the world had decided to forget their story, but she hadn't. One evening, as she was cleaning her studio after class, a young student named Lila came up to her, holding a newspaper. "Miss Amara," she said, "isn't this the man who came to the gallery with you once?" Amara froze. On the front page was a photo of Liam, standing in front of a new community center in the city's east side. The headline read, "Billionaire opens art program for local youth." Her eyes moved down the page and she saw a quote from him. "Art has the power to make people seen. This program is dedicated to those who feel invisible." Her throat tightened. Those were her words. She had once said them to him during one of their late-night talks. She smiled quietly, running her fingers over the paper. For the first time in months, she felt something warm stir in her chest. Maybe he hadn't forgotten after all. A week later, while she was packing up her supplies after another class, her phone buzzed. A message appeared. "Are you free tomorrow? I'd like to show you something." She stared at the screen, her heart beating fast. There was no name attached, but she didn't need one. She knew exactly who it was. She typed back slowly, "I'm free." The next afternoon, she found herself standing outside the same tall glass building where she had once visited his office months ago. The lobby was quiet, but the receptionist smiled and said, "He's expecting you." She took the elevator up, her hands trembling slightly. When the doors opened, Liam was waiting by the same window as before, sunlight behind him. He looked older somehow, not in age but in the kind of way people do when they've been through something that changes them. "Hi," he said, his voice calm, almost uncertain. "Hi," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. For a moment, they just stood there, both unsure where to start. Then he gestured for her to follow him. "I want to show you something," he said again, just like he had the first time. He led her down the hallway to a large room filled with canvases, paints, and easels. Children were inside, laughing and painting, their bright colors filling the space with life. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's the art program I told you about," he said. "We opened it last month. It's free for any child who wants to learn. We also have scholarships for students who can't afford art school." She turned to him. "You really did it." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Because of you. You made me remember what mattered. You showed me that not everything real has to be loud." Her heart ached with emotion. She looked around again, watching the children with their brushes and laughter. "They're lucky," she said softly. "So am I," he said quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to hum with quiet understanding. After a while, they stepped outside, walking along the garden beside the building. The air was cool, filled with the scent of new blossoms. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Amara admitted. "I didn't either," he said. "But some things don't feel finished until they are." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "You seem different," he smiled faintly. "I had to learn a few things the hard way. When I lost you, I realized I'd spent most of my life chasing everything but peace. You taught me that peace isn't found, it's created." Amara looked at him, her eyes soft. "I didn't do that." "You did?" He shook his head. "No, you showed me how." At one point, a journalist approached them with a camera. "Mr. Carter," he said, "people are curious. Are you and Miss Amara officially together?" Liam looked directly at the camera and said clearly, "Yes, we are." And I couldn't be prouder. Amara's breath caught. For the first time, he had said it publicly. The reporter's eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised, before thanking them and walking away. They sat on a bench nearby, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked after a moment. "The time we had?" She smiled wistfully. "Every now and then. But I think we both needed space to become who we were supposed to be." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I think I had to lose you to understand how much you meant." There was silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carries unspoken words, gratitude, love, forgiveness, all at once. After a while, he said softly, "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For changing me," he said. "For making me see the world differently." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "You did the same for me, you know." They talked for a while longer, about her art classes, his foundation, the simple joys they'd both learned to appreciate. There was no tension, no pressure, just two people who had walked through something rare and come out stronger. As the sun began to set, Liam stood and said, "There's one more thing I want to show you." He led her to the other side of the garden, where a new mural was being painted on a wall. It showed a woman sitting at a small restaurant table, looking out a window. The scene was calm, almost familiar. Amara stopped in her tracks. "That's," he smiled gently, "the night I met you." Her throat tightened. The details were unmistakable, the soft lighting, the empty chairs, the quiet expression on her face. "You remembered," she whispered. "I could never forget," he said. "That was the moment my life changed." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. She let the moment sink in. "I didn't paint it," he added. "One of the kids did." I told them the story, about a woman who didn't need to be seen to matter, but who ended up being the reason someone else finally learned to see. Amara laughed softly through her tears. "That's a beautiful story." "It's a true one," he said simply. They stood there together, watching the mural as the sky turned golden. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning of something quieter, something steadier. After a long pause, Liam said, "I don't know what the future looks like. I can't promise anything grand or perfect, but if you ever want to start again, even just as friends, I'd be grateful." Amara looked at him for a long time. There was no rush, no grand gesture, just sincerity. "Maybe we can start with coffee," she said softly. He smiled. Coffee sounds perfect. They walked back toward the building slowly, side by side. It felt easy, familiar in the best way. Over the next few weeks, they began seeing each other again. It wasn't like before. There were no photographers, no headlines, no pretending. They met for coffee, sometimes went to the park, or attended the children's art shows together. It was simple, quiet, and real. Liam would occasionally stop by her classes, helping the children clean brushes or carry supplies. The kids adored him, though most had no idea who he really was. To them, he was just Mr. L, the tall man who always smiled and brought snacks. One afternoon after class, Amara found him sitting on the floor surrounded by kids, helping them mix colors. She leaned against the door frame, smiling. He looked up and caught her watching. "What?" he asked, laughing. "Nothing," she said. "You just look happy." "I am," he replied simply. She walked over and handed him a towel to wipe his hands. "I don't think I've ever seen you like this before." He looked around the room. "Neither have I." That evening, when the children had gone and the room was quiet again, they stood by the window watching the sunset. "Funny," she said softly, "how we met by accident and ended up here." "Maybe it wasn't an accident," he said. "Maybe it was supposed to happen this way." Amara smiled. "You and your poetic lines again," he laughed. "What can I say? You inspire them." They shared a quiet moment, neither speaking, both understanding. There was no need to define what they were or what would come next. It was enough to simply be there, together. As time went on, they continued to build something steady. A friendship that felt like home, maybe even love, though they didn't rush to name it. They had learned that not every story needs a dramatic ending. Some simply continue quietly, in the spaces between ordinary days. Months later, the art program hosted its first citywide exhibition. Amara's students displayed their paintings proudly, and the room was filled with laughter and color. Liam stood beside her as the children explained their work to the visitors. At one point, a little girl tugged on Amara's sleeve and said, "Miss, who's the man in the painting?" Amara looked up at the canvas. It was a new piece she had painted showing a woman and a man sitting by the ocean, both looking at the horizon. She smiled. "Someone who reminded me that real things are worth waiting for." The girl grinned, nodded, and ran off to join her friends. Liam looked at the painting quietly. "You captured it perfectly," Amara smiled. "I just painted what I felt." As the evening came to a close and people began to leave, Liam turned to her and said, "You know, that night I first saw you sitting alone. I thought you looked peaceful. Now I realize you were just waiting for your world to start." She looked at him softly. "And you helped me start it." They stood there in the soft glow of the gallery lights, surrounded by color and life, both knowing that whatever their story had been, it had mattered. Maybe they weren't the kind of couple people wrote headlines about anymore, but that was fine. Their story had never been about fame or fortune. It had always been about finding something real, quietly, unexpectedly, and with open hearts. As they walked out into the cool night air, the city lights shimmered around them. Liam took her hand gently, not as a grand gesture, but as something simple and true. And in that quiet moment, Amara realized that the story wasn't ending after all. It was still being written, one calm, honest day at a time.